Who let the janitor write a manifesto on my gala stage? Chloe Kensington's voice rang sharp through the empty event hall like a scalpel-slicing silk. She stood at the center of the Kensington Edge Auditorium, one of Manhattan's most exclusive corporate spaces, draped in velvet glass and polished gold. Under the spotlight where tomorrow night's million-dollar gala would take place, her heels clicked once more as she approached the pristine whiteboard at stage left. Scrawled in neat, slightly tilted handwriting in black, dry erase ink were the words, "You're not your bank balance. You're someone's reason to believe." She squinted, mouth slightly agape. Was this a joke? A prank? Seriously, she snapped over her shoulder at her assistant. Who wrote? That the assistant, Mira Young, eager, slightly out of her depth, hurried down the aisle in her blazer and sneakers. I'm not sure. Probably one of the overnight janitors. They prep the floor before AV comes in. Chloe arched a brow. Prep the floor or host a TED Talk. Mira opened her mouth, but no words came. The quote wasn't offensive. In fact, something about it was oddly moving. But Chloe, CEO, data tycoon, and queen of rational margins, wasn't in the mood for sentimentality. Not now, not this week. She pulled her phone from her coat pocket, snapped a photo of the quote, and uploaded it to the internal Slack channel. Caption: When your cleaning crew gets philosophical, Josh you deep quotes from the mop team. A few laugh reactions popped up almost instantly. She shook her head. Have it wiped off before sunrise? Mira nodded. Yes, ma'am. Should I run a background check? Chloe waved her hand. It's a quote, not corporate espionage. Let it go. But as she turned back toward the hall's entrance, Mira lingered a second longer, reading the words again. Her brows furrowed not out of confusion, but something that looked closer to resonance. 15 hours later, the sun had barely risen over Midtown when Chloe returned, this time with her executive team in tow. The boardroom hummed with tension, chatter, and caffeine. Catering vendors lined the rear hallway. Tech crews adjusted lighting rigs and the LED panels that would display Chloe's welcome message during the gala. Everything had to be perfect. Kensington Edge was announcing its biggest philanthropic partnership to date, one that would be live-streamed to 32 countries. But the quote was still there, faintly wiped but not entirely erased. Chloe froze. There it was, ghosted in the glare of the morning lights. Someone's reason to believe. Unbelievable, she muttered. Then louder, Mira. I asked maintenance to clean it. No, Chloe said flatly. You asked nicely. That's the difference. One of the junior execs chuckled under his breath. Another leaned over and whispered, Maybe we should hire him in marketing. Chloe didn't smile. She was already walking toward the tech booth to review the cue sheets. Her jaw clenched not because of the quote, not really, but because she hated surprises. Her empire wasn't built on inspiration. It was built on algorithms. On predicting what people would buy, how they'd behave, and how to monetize every ounce of human hesitation. That's what she believed in: data discipline and dollars. Later that afternoon, while reviewing stage placements, Chloe's phone buzzed. It was a reply in the Slack thread from one of the newer UX designers named Eli. Not gonna lie, I kinda love that quote. Simple, but it hits deep. Another chimed in below. Maybe that janitor's seen more life than we have. Chloe frowned, locking her phone. She wasn't annoyed. She was unsettled. Why were people so moved by a sentence scrawled next to mop buckets? At 10:14 p.m., the auditorium stood silent again. Chairs perfectly aligned, floral arrangements like frozen fireworks. The space was ready. Chloe lingered at the back alone now. She'd sent everyone home, but she couldn't stop staring at the whiteboard. The janitor had returned. She heard the soft, steady drag of a mop somewhere beyond the curtains. She should have walked away. Instead, she picked up a marker. For a split second, she considered adding something her own counterpoint. A rebuttal. But her hand froze midair. The truth she didn't want to say out loud. That quote had stayed with her all day. And not because it was funny, but because it touched a part of her she rarely acknowledged, one that remembered what it was like not to be Chloe Kensington, the billionaire CEO, but just Chloe, the scholarship girl from Brooklyn, who used to fold napkins in a wedding hall to pay for textbooks, who for 3 years ate instant ramen for dinner so she could send extra to her dad's hospital bills, the girl who used to believe in things money couldn't buy. Suddenly, behind the curtain, a sound. A quiet voice humming something. A low, warm baritone, not loud, not attention-seeking. Just present. She gently let the marker fall back into its holder, and walked away. But the echo of that quote followed her into the dark. You're someone's reason to believe. She didn't know it yet, but those 6 words had just cracked the first fault line in the fortress she'd spent years building around her heart. Every night at 10:58 p.m., Daniel Shaw adjusted his blue utility vest, tugged on his gloves, and carried a bucket up to the 44th floor of the Kensington Edge building. No one ever spoke to him on that floor. No one asked his name. They just called him Janitor if they said anything at all. He didn't mind. The windows on that level floor-to-ceiling glass facing the glittering city were the last task of his shift. It was also the quietest place in his world. And Daniel had come to appreciate quiet in a way only people who've been drowned by noise ever truly can. Outside, Manhattan pulsed with light, but inside, Daniel's world moved slow like molasses through time. He wiped the panes one by one with steady, careful strokes as if he were clearing away more than just dust. As if he were revealing a city that had forgotten how to see itself. Behind him, the echo of his daughter's laugh from earlier that morning still rang in his ears. "Daddy, what if your mop was magic and made everything it touched sparkle like stardust?" He had smiled. "Well, then I'd have the most important job in the world, wouldn't I, Ellie?" 7 years old, all freckles and fire and the brightest heart he'd ever known. He cleaned glass for a living, but he lived for her. Earlier that day, Daniel had walked her to school in the chilly autumn air, her tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb. She wore the same red scarf her mother had knitted back before everything fell apart. Before cancer. Before lawyers. Before a courtroom decided that because he couldn't make 6 figures, he only deserved Ellie part-time. Still, he had custody 3 nights a week, and he made those nights count. Storybooks and grilled cheese, bubble baths and bedtime talks about stars' dreams and how to be someone good. That morning, Ellie had asked him why he wrote quotes on whiteboards when no one noticed. Daniel had knelt beside her. Because words live longer than Job's pumpkin. And sometimes, they find the person who needed them most. She'd nodded solemnly as only children can when they sense they're being handed something fragile and true. At 11:12 p.m., as Daniel finished the last window, his supervisor's voice crackled over the comms. "Daniel, you left a message on the auditorium board again." "I did," he replied calmly. It was late. No one was around. There was a pause. Then corporate flagged it. They want all surfaces cleared. No more writing, understood. Daniel didn't argue. He never did. Understood. He placed the rag into his bucket and turned toward the elevator. But before he reached the door, he passed the stage where the whiteboard stood. Faint ghosting from the ink still lingered. He didn't touch it. He just looked at it and whispered to no one. Some words stay, even when they're wiped away. Daniel's story wasn't one he told often, not because he was ashamed, but because people rarely asked. He had been a high school philosophy teacher, once respected, published, even awarded. But when a student's powerful parent accused him of politicizing the classroom over a lesson on moral courage, the school board folded. Legal fees mounted. His name was dragged. His savings evaporated. By the time it was over, his wife had left. His license had been suspended. And the only job that would take him was this. He'd been angry once. Bitter. But Ellie changed that. Her joy was a daily rebellion against cynicism. And every time she asked for a quote for her lunchbox, he found the strength to keep believing in what he couldn't yet see. So now, each night after vacuuming the carpet and emptying the trash, Daniel left a line of encouragement somewhere on a forgotten whiteboard, a sticky note in the staff kitchen, the margin of a break room newspaper. Not for recognition, but because the world as he saw it had enough data and not enough soul. As he reached the lobby that night, he spotted one of the night guards, Leo, scrolling through his phone and chuckling softly. "What's funny?" Daniel asked. Leo turned the screen. A photo of Daniel's quote posted by a Kensington Edge employee was getting shared around their internal app. "Didn't know you had fans," Leo grinned. Daniel half smiled. "I'm not trying to be famous." Leo shrugged. "Well, too late. You're trending among the junior analysts." Daniel nodded politely, but inside something stirred. Not pride, not fear, something quieter. Hope, maybe? Before heading home, Daniel made one last stop, the staff locker room. He removed his vest, folded it neatly, and reached for his bag. Inside was a small plastic folder of Ellie's newest drawings, her Monday masterpieces, she called them. Tonight's was a watercolor of a lion holding a broom with a speech bubble that read, "Courage isn't loud. Sometimes it sweeps quietly after hours." He smiled, brushing his fingers across the page. And then, just before leaving, he scribbled one more quote on the inside of his locker. "The world doesn't need more titles. It needs more anchors." He didn't know who would read it, but he always believed the right words had a way of finding the right hearts when they were needed most. And far above him on the 44th floor, a woman who had everything money could buy was about to discover the one thing it never could: $3 million. That was the number that glittered inside the small velvet box reflecting the chandeliers above. A diamond so clear it seemed carved from light itself, just like the woman who now stared at it without blinking. Chloe Kensington sat across from Ben Alcott in the private rooftop lounge of the Sterling Club, the city stretching below like a jeweled carpet. The wind tugged lightly at her silk sleeves, but her heart was perfectly still, calculating, cautious, composed. Ben smiled, that boardroom, confident kind of smile that sold investors and charmed reporters. "You know I don't do things halfway, Chloe. You deserve the best." She didn't look at the ring. She looked at him. "The best," she repeated softly as if testing the word for cracks. "Of course," he said. "You built an empire from nothing. You've earned it." There was a pause, a beat of silence too elegant to be awkward. Then she said what was truly on her mind. "Ben, do you believe love can be earned?" He chuckled. "Well, it can definitely be invested in." The corner of her lip curved, though it wasn't quite a smile. "You always make it sound like a balance sheet." He reached across the table, his tone playful. "Maybe because I'm the CFO, remember, everything's about balance." But inside, something in her twisted, because lately his eyes didn't hold the same warmth they once did. They measured her the way analysts measured quarterly growth, admiring, yes, but transactional. Still, she nodded. "Balance," she echoed, sliding her hand toward the ring box. The diamond sparkled like a promise or a warning. That night, as the city fell asleep, Chloe sat in her glass-walled penthouse overlooking the Hudson. The ring lay beside her laptop, catching reflections of blue from the screen. She opened a document titled Marriage Prenup Draft, scanning through the legal clauses her lawyer had sent. The words were all logic assets, disclosures, liabilities. No warmth, no pulse. Her phone buzzed a message from Ben. "Can you sign the final doc tonight? My team needs it for the merger paperwork tomorrow." Chloe hesitated. She was used to decisive choices. But something about the phrasing for the merger paperwork felt wrong. Love shouldn't sound like a transaction. And yet her whole life had been a series of them. The next morning, she arrived at the office early. The Kensington Edge headquarters gleamed with corporate precision glass marble and ambition. Every step of her heels echoed authority. In the CFO's suite, Ben was already there, crisp, suit-polished tone. "Morning, love," he greeted, kissing her cheek lightly before turning to his screen. "Big day ahead. If the audit clears, we'll finalize the global fund launch by Friday. You'll be on the cover of Fortune again by Monday." Chloe smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You sound more excited about the magazine than the marriage." He looked up briefly, a flash of surprise, then softened. "You know how I get when business heats up." "Right," she murmured. I do. Then her assistant appeared at the door, holding a folder, face pale. Ms. Kensington. I think you should see this. Inside were 2 spreadsheets, one labeled Kensington Edge Fund Transfers and another Alcott Holdings Private Accounts. The numbers aligned perfectly. Millions. Quietly rerouted. Her voice came out low, almost a whisper. This can't be right. Ben stood behind her, his expression unreadable. Where did you get that? It doesn't matter where, she said coldly. It matters why. He exhaled slowly, setting his hands on the desk. Chloe, you know how these things work. It's not theft, it's strategic repositioning, temporary liquidity management. She turned to him, stunned. You moved company funds into a shell account under your name. That's not liquidity, that's fraud. He met her gaze, steady, unapologetic. It's leverage, and it's what keeps this empire standing. Her heart hammered. You used my company, my trust. He leaned closer, voice suddenly hard. I used what you built because you've forgotten what built you risk. You talk about integrity like it's a currency, but investors don't buy virtue, Chloe. They buy results. The room felt smaller, colder. And what about love? She whispered. Was that a result, too? For the first time, he faltered. His jaw tightened, eyes flickering with something between guilt and defiance. I love you, he said quietly. But love doesn't pay the board. That sentence cut deeper than betrayal ever could. By midnight, Chloe was alone again. Her penthouse lights glowed against the storm outside. The ring sat on the marble counter, glinting under lightning. She poured herself a glass of red wine, but it tasted like iron and regret. Her reflection in the window looked like a stranger, one she'd crafted, polished, perfected, but didn't recognize anymore. Her phone lit up. Another message from Ben. We'll fix this. Just keep quiet until the merger closes. You'll thank me later. Chloe stared at it for a long time. Then she placed the phone face down. Her empire felt like a skyscraper built on glass, shining fragile one storm away from collapse, and yet, beneath all that noise, one simple memory surfaced, that whiteboard. That absurd little quote written in cheap ink by a janitor she'd never met. You're not your bank balance. You're someone's reason to believe. For the first time, she didn't laugh at it. She whispered it. To the storm. To herself. And then she did something no algorithm could predict. She took off the ring, slipped it into its box, and set it aside like a relic from a life that no longer fit. The rain grew heavier, streaking against the glass like the world was trying to wash itself clean. Chloe stood there barefoot, breathing deeply, her chest trembling with the realization that maybe, just maybe, she'd been living her life in the wrong currency. Not money, not status, but meaning. And tomorrow, when the sun rose over the Kensington Edge building, she would walk through that lobby again, this time not as a queen controlling her world, but as a woman finally brave enough to question it. Because some storms don't destroy. They reveal. You're not supposed to be here, Miss Kensington. The voice was calm, steady, almost apologetic. Chloe turned around, startled. Her heels had clicked too loudly in the silence of the empty lobby, echoing like guilt. It was nearly 3:20 a.m., and she had no reason to be here. No meeting, no media appearance, no strategic agenda. Just a restlessness in her chest that had driven her from the penthouse down into the belly of the building. And there he was. The janitor. The man behind the whiteboard quote. He was standing near the far window rolling up the cord on a vacuum cleaner. Worn navy shirt, calloused hands, strong frame, eyes that looked like they belonged to someone who'd read far too much to be cleaning floors for a living. Chloe straightened her posture instinctively. I wasn't aware I needed permission to walk through my own building. The man gave a slight nod, unfazed. Didn't mean to offend, just surprised. Not many billionaires roamed the lobby at this hour. The way he said it, dry, not disrespectful, caught her off guard. She crossed her arms. You're the one who wrote that quote, aren't you? He met her eyes. Yes, ma'am. Chloe's tone sharpened. Why? What exactly did you think you were doing? Writing self-help slogans on company property? He didn't flinch. It wasn't for the company. Then, for who she asked. He hesitated, then looked past her toward the dark windows that reflected their silhouettes. For the person who might need it more than they realize. There was a silence. Not uncomfortable. Heavy. Chloe exhaled, letting her mask slip just a little. Do I look like I need it? He studied her, but not the way others did, not measuring her net worth her beauty or her power. Just her. No, he said quietly. You look like someone who stopped believing in something important. That's different. Those words sliced through her like glass. For a moment she wanted to lash back, to assert her control, but something about the way he stood there firm but gentle made her feel safe and seen. She sat on the edge of the marble bench near the entrance. The cold seeped through her coat. You're not what I expected from a janitor. He smiled faintly. You're not what I expected from a billionaire. Her lip twitched, almost a smirk. What's your name? Daniel. Daniel Shaw. She tilted her head. Where'd you learn to write things like that, Daniel? He returned to wrapping the vacuum cord, speaking over his shoulder. Used to teach philosophy. High school mostly, some community college. That stopped her. You were a teacher. Yeah. A pause. Until I wasn't. She waited for more, but he didn't offer it. And now you're mopping floors in a building owned by someone who laughed at your quote, she said, half to herself. Daniel finally turned to her, but his face held no bitterness. It's okay. I didn't write it for applause. Then, what for? He glanced upward toward the high ceilings. Some days, I just need to leave behind a small truth before I wipe away another man's footprint. Gives the night meaning. That silenced her. You know, she said after a moment, someone once told me, meaning doesn't matter if it doesn't move the numbers. Daniel raised an eyebrow. And do you believe that? I used to, she admitted. Until yesterday. He gave a nod, understanding without prying. We all have a yesterday like that, when the world tilts and nothing adds up anymore. Another silence fell, but this one felt like shelter, not tension. Then he stepped into the tiny break room nearby, returning with a small paper cup filled with something warm. Here, he said, handing it to her. Hot cocoa. Vending machine quality, terrible taste, excellent symbolism. Chloe blinked, surprised. You think I'm the type to drink vending machine cocoa? No, he said with a smile. I think you're the type to appreciate gestures when no one's watching. She took it, sipped, winced. You weren't lying. This is horrible. Some nights require horrible cocoa, he said softly, just to remind us we're still human. Chloe stared at him. For the first time in a very long time, someone wasn't trying to fix her or flatter her. He was simply there, listening, respecting her silence as much as her words. You ever get angry, Daniel? She asked. He didn't hesitate. Every day. How do you deal with it? His answer was slow, measured, by not confusing the weight of the world with my own worth, and by remembering that bitterness punishes the vessel more than the wound. That stopped her. She held the cup tighter as if it grounded her. You sound like someone who's lost more than he says. He looked at her, then not past her, not through her, but into her. I've lost, he said. But I've also found that healing doesn't always come from victory. Sometimes it comes from choosing not to hate. Her eyes burned, and then quietly she said, I haven't cried in 7 years. He nodded. That's a long time to carry weight without letting it rain. A tear slipped down her cheek like a quiet surrender. She wiped it quickly, almost embarrassed. But Daniel didn't look away. He simply said, You're not weak for breaking. You're wise for finally allowing it. For the first time in forever, Chloe felt something shift inside her. A crack in the armor, a breeze in a sealed room. They sat like that for a long while, no deals, no masks, no scoreboard. Just two people, two storms, meeting in the quiet hours. And in the distance the quote still faintly glowed on the whiteboard down the hall. "You're not your bank balance. You're someone's reason to believe." Maybe it had always been meant for her. At first it was once a week, then twice. No one noticed, not the security guards, not the late-night staff, not even the janitorial manager who quietly signed off on the logs. But Chloe Kensington had started showing up at the lobby at odd hours. Sometimes just before sunrise, sometimes after most of the lights had dimmed. She never made it obvious. She wasn't there for show. She was there for the man with calloused hands and quiet eyes, the janitor who once taught philosophy who didn't flinch when she broke down over vending machine cocoa, and, most importantly, the man who never asked for anything in return. Daniel Shaw. She never told him she'd be coming. She just appeared, always with a reason. Of course, I forgot something in my office or I needed to review the marble quality of the lobby, but both of them knew those reasons weren't real. Tonight she lingered by the window near the south entrance pretending to scroll her phone. The city sparkled in the glass, but she wasn't looking at the skyline. She was waiting. "Let me guess," a voice came from behind her, checking for fingerprints on the window trim again. She turned, not startled this time. Daniel was pushing a cart of cleaning supplies, his sleeves rolled up a soft towel slung over one shoulder. Chloe smiled, small but genuine. "It's amazing how filthy a billionaire's lobby can get, isn't it?" He grinned. Not filthy. Just lived in. They stood quietly for a moment, the hum of distant traffic wrapping the silence between them. "You always clean at this time?" she asked. "I clean when it's quiet," he said. "It's when people leave behind the most honest messes." Chloe looked at him curious. "You think messes can be honest?" Daniel wiped a smudge off the glass and shrugged. "Footprints don't lie. Neither do coffee spills or lipstick stains on bathroom mirrors. They tell you who someone really is when they think no one's watching." She thought about that. About her own trail, burnt bridges, half-finished deals, locked office doors hiding exhausted breakdowns. "I used to be terrified of people seeing my mess," she said softly. "Now, I think the real fear is that no one ever would." Daniel didn't respond immediately. When he finally did, his voice was lower. "People like you aren't used to being witnessed, only watched. That hit something deep." "Is that how you were with your students?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Every teenager thinks they're invisible. My job wasn't to teach them Aristotle, it was to convince them they mattered." "And what happened?" He paused, the towel still in his hands. "I wrote a recommendation letter for a student who was falsely accused of theft. The school board didn't like that I questioned their judgment. One thing led to another. And suddenly I was no longer the teacher, just the janitor in the building next door." Chloe's eyes narrowed. "You were punished for standing up for someone." He chuckled. "Irony, isn't it? You teach ethics, and the moment you live it, you lose everything." She stared at him. "That's not irony, Daniel. That's injustice." His smile was quiet. "I've stopped measuring life by what's fair. Now I measure it by what I can still give." That line, so simple, so profound, settled deep into her bones. "Do you still write those quotes?" she asked. "Sometimes. Not every night. Just when I feel something's too heavy to carry alone." Chloe glanced around, then stepped closer. "Why don't you post them? Go viral like everyone else?" He raised an eyebrow. "Truth isn't always meant to be viral. Sometimes it's meant to be whispered in the right hallway at the right moment." She looked at him for a long time, then asked, "Do you write them for anyone in particular?" His eyes met hers. "I write them for the person who doesn't even realize they need them yet." That line made her throat tighten. She hesitated. Then, almost without thinking, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it gently and held it out. It was a printed screenshot. The photo she had once mocked on the company's internal thread, the one of his whiteboard quote, "You're not your bank balance. You're someone's reason to believe." She had printed it the night after their first conversation, and she had kept it in her purse ever since. "I didn't understand it then," she said quietly. "I thought it was just sentimental fluff. And now she said, her voice steady, I think it might have been the most honest sentence I've read in years." Daniel didn't take the paper. He didn't need to. He simply looked at her and said, "You're someone's reason to believe, too. You just forgot." The words stung, not because they hurt, but because they healed. After a long silence, Chloe whispered, "I never asked. But who do you believe in, Daniel?" He thought for a moment, then replied, "In the power of someone finally asking that question." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of things unsaid, of truths, felt of hearts cautiously opening. They didn't make plans. They didn't schedule another meeting. But both of them knew this wouldn't be the last time they'd speak. Sometimes the best conversations aren't the ones you plan. They're the ones you need, even if you don't know it yet. Why does a woman with a penthouse office cry in her car at 2 a.m.? Daniel didn't ask the question out loud, but he didn't have to. He saw it in Chloe's eyes the moment she walked into the darkened conference room that night, heels in hand, mascara, smudged blazer, wrinkled from sitting in the driver's seat far too long. She hadn't meant to be there. The building was supposed to be empty, but habit and heartache had a way of pulling people toward quiet places. Daniel was wiping down the large glass table when she entered. His hand paused mid-swipe. She stopped in the doorway, startled. "I didn't think anyone would be here." "I could say the same," he replied, setting the cloth down gently. "But we both know this place keeps ghosts. Some of us just come to listen to them." She gave a dry laugh, though it cracked in the middle. "What do ghosts say to janitors?" He shrugged. "Depends. Some whisper regrets. Some scream truths." Chloe stepped inside, closed the door, and leaned against it. She looked less like a billionaire and more like a little girl who'd been holding her breath for too long. "I fired someone today," she said quietly. "Someone who didn't deserve it." Daniel nodded. "And you didn't fight for them. I didn't even ask for their side of the story," she admitted. "I let the board pressure me. I watched a good man walk out with a cardboard box because I was too scared to look weak." He studied her face. Strength without empathy is just intimidation dressed in a suit. She winced, not at him, but at herself. "Do you know what's worse?" she whispered. "I used to be that employee. The one overlooked. The one blamed for things she didn't do." Daniel remained silent, allowing the weight of her confession to settle. "When I was 23, Chloe continued walking slowly toward the table. I worked nights as an assistant in a tech firm. I caught my supervisor embezzling small funds, $500 here, $700 there. When I reported it, I got fired. No severance, no apology." She touched the edge of the table with her fingers almost absent-mindedly. "It took me 6 months to find another job. I ate canned soup every night and stole Wi-Fi from a neighbor to apply for internships I was overqualified for. I promised myself then if I ever got to the top, I'd never become like them. And yet, here you are," Daniel said softly. Chloe nodded. "Somewhere along the way. I stopped climbing and started surviving." He leaned against the cart arms folded. "The higher you go, the lonelier it gets. No one teaches you how to hold your soul together at 30,000 feet. Her voice cracked. "You ever feel like you became the very thing you swore you'd destroy?" Daniel looked at her, his eyes unwavering. "Every single day. Until I decided to stop pretending the fall wasn't worth surviving." Silence stretched again comfortably this time. Chloe took a deep breath, then asked, "What did you lose?" "Daniel, really?" He hesitated. "My wife. Cancer. It was fast." Her expression softened immediately. "I'm sorry. She told me something before she passed," he said. "Sitting in that hospital bed, frail and fading, she looked me in the eye and said, Don't let your pain make you small. Chloe swallowed. But pain does make us small. It folds us in. It only does, he said, if we keep trying to carry it alone. She sat in the chair across from him. Do you have bad days? He smiled. I have bad hours, but I remind myself broken doesn't mean useless. It just means real. That word hit her like a stone skipping across still water. Real. I've built an empire on branding and precision, she admitted. But I don't remember the last time I felt real. He glanced at the floor-to-ceiling windows. Maybe that's why the janitor's quote hit you harder than any boardroom strategy ever could. She chuckled, brushing her hair back. You keep saying things like that, I might have to give you a raise. He smirked. You'd have to hire me first. That made her laugh, honest, full-throated, surprising even herself. When the laughter faded, she looked at him, her gaze steady. You know, I used to think I needed saving. From stress, from loneliness, from failure. And now he asked. Now she said, I think I just needed someone who didn't treat my pain like a press release. Daniel nodded slowly. We don't get to choose all our wounds, Chloe, but we do get to choose who we bleed in front of. For a moment, neither of them said a word. The conference room, usually sterile cold, all glass and chrome, suddenly felt like the safest place in the world. She stood up, walked around the table, and placed a hand gently on his forearm. Thank you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. For what? For not cleaning me up, like just another stain on your shift. He looked down at her hand, then into her eyes. Some stains aren't meant to be scrubbed away. Some are meant to remind us of who we were before we forgot. Chloe didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a CEO standing above a janitor. She felt like a woman finally seen by a man who didn't need her title to see her worth. Is it true, Ellie asked, holding up her latest watercolor, that even cloudy skies can't erase the light within us? Daniel looked at his daughter, then at the picture in her hands, a golden sun peeking through thick gray clouds, its rays reaching down like gentle fingers. Underneath, in her careful 7-year-old handwriting, was the quote she had learned from him months ago. He nodded, smiling softly. It's true, Bug. Light doesn't stop being light just because something tries to cover it. Outside, the rain tapped gently on their apartment window. Inside, warmth lived in the steam rising from a chipped mug of hot cocoa and the soft jazz humming from the radio. Ellie squinted at the painting again. Can I give this one away? Daniel tilted his head. To who? She shrugged. The woman you talk to sometimes in the lobby. She looks like she forgets her light. The next evening, Chloe Kensington stepped off the elevator not in heels or silk, but in jeans and a hoodie hood, still damp from the drizzle outside. Her eyes scanned the marble lobby, then landed on the janitor mopping near the entrance. Daniel was humming under his breath, quietly lost in thought. When he noticed her, he paused, but didn't speak first. That was his rhythm now. Stillness before words. Chloe broke the silence. I didn't think I'd be the kind of person who waited in lobbies for someone like you. He leaned on the mop handle. And what kind of person is that? She exhaled, her voice tinged with irony. Someone looking for answers from a man with a bucket and a quote board. He chuckled. You'd be surprised how often the best questions come from people who stop pretending to know everything. She hesitated, then reached into her bag. I brought something. Or rather, your daughter did. Daniel raised an eyebrow as she carefully unfolded a plastic sleeve containing Ellie's painting. He recognized it instantly, the cloudy sky, the stubborn sun. I didn't know what to say to her, Chloe admitted. But when she handed this to me yesterday, she said, everyone needs someone to believe in them, even if it's just one person. Daniel's throat tightened. She's got more wisdom in her crayons than most boardrooms I've seen. Chloe smiled faintly, then turned serious. You told me you used to think you didn't deserve forgiveness. I've been carrying that same weight. But Ellie, your daughter, She gave me that painting without asking who I've been or what I've done. She doesn't care about resumes, Daniel said gently. She paints people as who they could be, not who the world says they are. A long pause hung between them, not uncomfortable, just full. Then Chloe whispered, "May I meet her?" That Sunday, the Kensingtons' world collided with the Shaws in the most unexpected place, a modest art supply store in Queens that hosted weekend workshops for kids. Daniel and Ellie arrived early. Ellie, with her overalls speckled in dry paint, bounced between easels. Daniel set up her brushes all second-hand, but loved. When Chloe walked in, she stood at the threshold for a long moment, watching Ellie giggle with another little girl. Daniel walked over, offering her a quiet smile. "You're early." "I didn't want to miss anything," she said, eyes softening as she took in the scene. "This is your world, isn't it?" He nodded. "The part I'm proudest of." Ellie spotted them and came running. "Miss Chloe," she beamed. "I brought you a brush." Chloe crouched down, accepting the bright blue handle. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm not very good at painting." Ellie shrugged. "You don't have to be. You just have to try. That's what Daddy says." Chloe looked up at Daniel. He offered a subtle nod, not as a prompt, but as quiet reinforcement. They painted together that morning. Ellie explained her gallery of quotes where every picture had a sentence hidden in the colors. "Because sometimes words hide better in pictures," she explained seriously. Chloe asked, "Can I make one too?" Ellie handed her a canvas. "Only if you promise not to think too hard. Feel it, instead." Later, sitting on a bench outside, Chloe stared at her own messy brushstrokes, a swirl of blues and reds unintentionally forming a shape that resembled a heart. Daniel sat beside her, Ellie busy with a juice box nearby. "I used to think control was the only way to survive," Chloe admitted, "that if I could just predict everything people outcomes, I'd never fall." Daniel looked out at the small courtyard, the sound of children laughing in the distance. And yet, here you are, painting with a 7-year-old who barely follows the lines. She smiled, eyes glassy. And somehow this feels safer than any boardroom. A beat passed. Then she asked, "Do you ever regret it, losing your old life?" He was quiet for a moment before replying. "I miss the classroom, the debates, watching someone discover a thought that changes how they see the world." He turned to her. "But Ellie, she's my classroom now. Every day I get to teach her what matters, not with lectures but with how I show up." Chloe nodded slowly. "You show up for people, Daniel, even when they don't deserve it. You showed up for yourself today," he said gently. "That counts." Ellie skipped back over and held up a painting. It was 3 stick figures, a girl with curly hair, a man with a mop, and a woman with a bright yellow crown. Underneath, in bold crayon letters, it read, "Kindness makes kings and queens out of janitors and dreamers." Chloe's voice caught in her throat. "Ellie, is that me?" Ellie grinned. "You're the queen, but only if you keep being nice." Chloe laughed a sound so unguarded Daniel nearly forgot to breathe. Then Ellie tilted her head. "Miss Chloe, do you have someone who writes quotes for you too?" Chloe went still. After a long pause, she looked at Daniel, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't. Not until now. It started with a phone call, one Daniel never expected. Miss Shaw, this is Amelia, assistant to Ms. Kensington. She'd like to formally invite you to participate in an internal advisory session for our new outreach initiative." Daniel paused his mop halfway across the marble. "I'm sorry, did you say advisory session?" "Yes, sir," she replied briskly. "Ms. Kensington specifically requested you. The pilot program is called Financial Healing, and she believes your perspective might offer unique value." Daniel stared at the polished floor beneath him. He could see his own reflection, faint blurred, but still there. "I'll be there," he said softly. The meeting room was nothing like the lobby where Daniel spent his nights. No jazz, no echo of late-night mopping. Just glass leather and the scent of power. 12 executives sat around the sleek table. All of them knew who he was, at least the version that emptied their trash cans and wiped their windows. Not the man who used to teach lectures on meaning and self-worth. Chloe entered last. Unlike her usual sharp-edged armor, she wore something softer today. Earth tones. No jewelry. No pretense. "Thank you all for being here," she said, glancing briefly at Daniel before turning to the group. "Today's not about optics. It's about rebuilding trust, starting with the stories we've ignored." Murmurs swept across the table. One VP adjusted his cufflink. The acting CFO, Walter Gaines, leaned back with thinly veiled skepticism. And Mr. Shaw Chloe continued gesturing to Daniel, has generously agreed to share his insights. Not as a janitor. As a human being who's lived what many of our clients are living, disorientation loss and the long road back. Daniel stood slowly. He didn't have a PowerPoint. No bullet points. Just calloused hands and a voice that didn't need to raise itself to be heard. "I once taught philosophy," he began, "until a false accusation cost me everything: my career, my reputation, my sense of self." The room grew still. I took a job cleaning offices because it was the only door still open. But even then, I kept writing quotes on whiteboards because I believed that if one person read it and felt less invisible, it mattered. He paused, locking eyes with Walter Gaines, who remained stone-faced. "This isn't just about money. Financial ruin isn't always the worst part. It's the silence afterward. The shame. The way people stop looking you in the eye." Chloe's gaze didn't waver. "That's why financial healing matters. People need tools, yes. But before that, they need dignity." One board member cleared his throat. "This is compelling, but it's unorthodox. Why should our firm, a financial institution, anchor its next initiative on the words of a janitor?" Before Chloe could answer, Daniel spoke. "Because the people you want to help don't trust suits. They trust those who've sat on cold steps with eviction letters in hand, who've held crying children in food pantry lines. They trust lived truth." There was a silence, a long, uncomfortable one. Then Walter leaned forward, fingers steepled. "With all due respect, Ms. Kensington, I believe this is a risk. Publicly aligning the firm with someone whose background includes dismissal from a public school and years in custodial labor. It opens the company to questions and scrutiny." Chloe didn't flinch. "You want scrutiny," she said quietly. "Where was the scrutiny when Ben Alcott was siphoning company funds under your watch?" A hush fell over the room. Walter's jaw clenched. That was never proven. Chloe stood voice calm but firm. "Let me be clear. I didn't bring Mr. Shaw here for approval. I brought him because the people we claim to serve deserve more than financial statements and charity galas. They deserve someone who's walked their path and still chose hope." She turned to Daniel. "Do you remember what you told me that night in the lobby?" He nodded. "I said, I used to think I didn't deserve forgiveness." Chloe faced the room. "Well, I used to think I didn't deserve peace." Her voice softened. "But that was before I started listening. Not to press releases, not to shareholders, but to a man who reminded me that value isn't earned through titles, it's remembered through impact." No one dared speak. Daniel looked down at his hands. The same hands that once held chalk. The same ones that held Ellie when she cried. The same ones that now held weight far heavier than any mop. "I'm not here to take anyone's job," he said. "I'm here because someone finally believed that words matter. And I'm here for the people who've been told they don't." After the meeting, as the executives shuffled out, some shaken, some thoughtful Chloe stayed behind. Daniel stood by the window watching the sunset over the city. "You didn't have to defend me," he said. She joined him, folding her arms. "You're wrong. I did. Not because you needed it, but because I needed to finally stand up for something that couldn't be calculated." He glanced at her. "You risked a lot today." She smiled faintly. "I've lost everything before, but today didn't feel like a loss." Daniel tilted his head. "What did it feel like? A beginning." She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded printout and email that had been sent by a junior employee to the internal network. It was a screenshot of Daniel's original quote on the whiteboard, the one Chloe had once mocked. "You're not your bank balance. You're someone's reason to believe." She read it slowly. "There's a post going around," she continued. "People are tagging it with 'Do you believe?' Again. Your words. They're spreading Daniel." He chuckled under his breath. "Funny. I wrote them for no one." Chloe turned to him. "Or maybe you wrote them for me." It began with a post buried deep in the company's forgotten intranet, never meant to see the light beyond internal chat threads. A junior analyst named Trevor, fresh out of grad school and still clinging to idealism, had saved the image months ago. The whiteboard with Daniel's handwritten quote had stayed in his camera roll not because of the words alone, but because of the moment. "You're not your bank balance. You're someone's reason to believe." Back then, Trevor hadn't dared speak up when Chloe mocked it. But after watching her stand beside Daniel in the meeting room, unapologetic, composed, changed, he found the courage to repost it. This time, not as a joke. This time with a single caption. Turns out this saved more than a mop. And a hashtag, #believe again. By the end of the day, the post had made its way from the dusty corners of the company Slack to LinkedIn, then to Twitter, then to a viral Reddit thread titled "Philosopher Janitor Teaches Billionaire What Money Can't Buy." Thousands began reposting the quote, sharing their own stories, layoffs, debt, divorce, illness, times when they too felt like numbers on a spreadsheet, invisible, uncounted, unloved, and yet something in Daniel's words cut through. In a world obsessed with measurement, he had reminded them of meaning. Inside the modest apartment in Queens, Daniel was wiping down the kitchen table when Ellie burst through the door from school waving a thick envelope. "Daddy, I got mail that's not bills." He chuckled. "Let me see sunshine." She handed it over, eyes wide with suspense. Daniel opened it slowly, expecting a catalog. Instead, he found a letter, formal, embossed. He read aloud, "Dear Eleanor Shaw, we are delighted to award you the Rising Voices Scholarship in Creative Arts, recognizing your exceptional artwork and message of hope. Your watercolor piece, Light Within the Clouds, will be featured in the National Showcase next month in D.C. Ellie gasped. "That's my sunshine painting. The one I gave Miss Chloe." Daniel's throat tightened. "She must have sent it in," he whispered. Ellie looked up at him. "Does this mean I get to fly on a plane?" He smiled. "It means someone saw your light, sweetheart, and they want the world to see it too." Meanwhile, in a downtown studio across Manhattan, Chloe sat in front of a softly lit camera. The talk show host, a sharp but warm woman named Liana Royce, leaned in. "Ms. Kensington, this quote has swept across platforms. You're not your bank balance. You're someone's reason to believe. Millions are resonating with it, and you helped bring it to the world." Why, Chloe took a breath. This was her first live interview since the Ben scandal broke. "Because I spent most of my life thinking value came from control," she began. "Control of data, of decisions, of outcomes. But I learned that control is not the same as meaning." Liana nodded. "And where did the quote come from?" "From a janitor," Chloe said, letting the word settle. "From a man named Daniel Shaw, who used to teach philosophy until the world tried to convince him he didn't matter anymore." She looked into the camera. He kept writing these messages on whiteboards even when no one noticed, because he believed someone out there still needed to hear it. Liana smiled. "And maybe that someone was you." Chloe's lips curled faintly. "Exactly." Later that night, Daniel stood outside the window of a small bookstore near the edge of Midtown. Inside a chalkboard sign read, tonight's, quote, "You can't buy belief." Daniel Shaw. He stared at it, stunned. A teenager behind the counter spotted him and hurried outside. "Are you the Daniel Shaw?" Daniel blinked. I suppose I am." The boy beamed. "Dude, you're all over my feed." "That quote. It got me through my first semester of college. I even wrote it on my final exam folder. My professor said it was the first thing she smiled at in weeks. Daniel smiled, shaking his head in disbelief. I just wrote what I wished someone had told me. Well, the world's listening now, the boy said. You should come in. They're doing an open mic on personal resilience. People are reading your quotes. Daniel looked through the window again. Young people, elderly women, a single father in scrubs all gathered, nodding along to words he once scribbled alone at midnight. I think I'll just listen, he said. Sometimes silence says the most. Back home, as Ellie drifted off to sleep, Daniel watched her chest rise and fall. The scholarship letter sat on the table beside her. The quote on the bookstore window still fresh in his mind. He thought about how everything had started, not with ambition, not with recognition, but with a simple choice to leave a small piece of hope behind on a whiteboard, even when no one asked for it. He ran a hand over his face and whispered, "Maybe that's all belief ever is, choosing to keep planting seeds in silence." Across the city, Chloe sat in her penthouse office with the lights off. Her assistant had left a stack of reports for review, but she ignored them. Instead, she opened her phone, scrolled through the flood of reposts, the comments, the hashtags. She stopped at one message from a woman in Nebraska I was going to give up on my small business. Then I saw that quote. I hung it up on the wall. I'm staying open for one more season. For my son. Thank you. Chloe read it 3 times, then turned to the framed painting on her desk, Ellie's sunshine shining through gray skies. You're not your bank balance, she whispered aloud. Then, with a small knowing smile, she added softly, and I'm finally starting to believe that includes me. Rain tapped gently against the hospital window, the kind that didn't scream emergency, but whispered fragility. Daniel sat beside Ellie's bed, his hand wrapped around her tiny fingers as the IV monitor beeped in its steady rhythm. Her head was bandaged, a small scrape on her cheek, the only visible wound, but the fall from the monkey bars had left her unconscious long enough for any parent to feel the world stop. "Daddy," she whispered, barely audible. He leaned in instantly. "I'm right here, sunshine." Her eyes fluttered open. Did I ruin your big speech? Daniel smiled, though his throat ached. There's no speech more important than this one. Ellie gave a weak laugh. That's such a dad thing to say. Outside the room, nurses moved quietly and the hallway bustled with soft urgency. But inside time stood still. Daniel's phone buzzed on the chair beside him, Chloe's name glowing on the screen. He didn't answer. At the same moment across the city, Chloe stood backstage at the symposium. The ballroom was packed. CEOs, nonprofit leaders, educators, therapists. The audience was primed for Daniel Shaw, the janitor philosopher who'd become a quiet symbol of redemption and resilience. But he wasn't coming. Chloe had read his message again and again since dawn. I'm sorry, Chloe. Ellie fell. She's in the hospital. I can't leave her side today, not even for 1,000 microphones. You'll understand why. Tell them whatever you want. Or, if you'd read them this. Attached was a simple document. Not a speech, not a manifesto, just Daniel raw and unvarnished. She walked on stage. No dramatic music, no lights dimmed. She simply took a breath and began. Good afternoon. My name is Chloe Kensington. I was supposed to introduce someone else today, a man most of you don't know but already feel connected to. He couldn't be here. His daughter needed him more, and that is the whole point. The room fell quiet. Instead of reading his biography, I'll read his words. Not because they're perfect, but because they're true. She looked up, locked eyes with a woman in the front row, eyes full of silent pain, and then read, Don't chase spotlights if the person who matters most is already shining at home. Because sometimes the most important audience is sitting in a hospital bed, with a crayon in hand and a scraped knee. Sometimes the person who needs to hear you the most doesn't wear a suit. They wear a Band-Aid and ask if soup comes with animal crackers. Don't confuse applause with love. Don't trade your story for someone else's microphone. If you're looking for your worth, Try looking where someone's waiting for you to come home. There wasn't a sound in the hall until the first tear hit paper and the next person clapped. Then the room erupted. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Daniel glanced at the clock. The talk would have started by now. Maybe even ended. Ellie stirred. Did they like it? He nodded. I think they did. Will I still get soup with animal crackers? He laughed through his nose, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Every single time. There was a knock on the door. A nurse poked her head in. Mr. Shaw. Someone dropped this off for you at the front desk. She handed him a small envelope with the Kensington Edge seal. Inside was a single Polaroid, a snapshot of the audience standing in ovation. On the back, Chloe's handwriting read, Your voice was heard, and so was your heart. That night, as Ellie slept peacefully, Daniel stepped outside to the hospital courtyard. The rain had stopped. Everything smelled like new beginnings. He pulled out his phone and opened social media, not his usual habit. But something had told him to check. There it was, a hashtag trending in over 20 cities. Shine, at home. It was paired with quotes from his talk Ellie's drawing of the sun, and even a photo someone had dug up of the original whiteboard with his message months ago. You're not your bank balance. You're someone's reason to believe. Daniel stared at it stunned. He hadn't wanted recognition. But maybe the point was never about being seen. Maybe it was about being understood. Across the city, Chloe sat alone in her penthouse office. Lights of Manhattan flickered beyond the glass. She held the framed drawing Ellie had once given her the sun with the words, Even cloudy skies can't erase the light within you. She placed it next to the awards on her shelf. Not beneath them, not above them, beside them. She picked up her phone, typed a message, then paused, erasing it. Instead, she sent only this, Thank you for letting the world hear what I had the privilege to witness first. Daniel read it later that night. And didn't reply. He didn't need to. Some words. Stay behind, even when you're not in the room. Some words. Keep living in the hearts they were meant to reach. And tonight the world didn't need another spotlight. It needed a little more light from home. The morning sun lit the quiet streets of Queens with a golden softness, the kind that made even cracked sidewalks seem like invitations. Daniel stood on his front porch, a steaming mug of coffee in hand, watching Ellie chase bubbles across the yard. Her laughter rang through the crisp air, high and clear like wind chimes catching a breeze. For the first time in years, peace didn't feel like a guest. It felt like home. Then came the knock. He opened the door to find Chloe Kensington dressed not in heels and Power No Designer handbag or press team behind her, but in jeans, a soft gray coat, and holding a large frame wrapped in brown paper. Morning, she said gently. Daniel blinked, surprised. Did I forget an appointment? She smiled. No, but I didn't want this moment to be on any calendar. He stepped aside and she entered the modest living room. The walls were covered with Ellie's watercolor painting sunrises, birds, forests of impossible colors. But at the center hung one piece different from the rest, a child's drawing of a man and a girl holding hands beneath a quote in shaky lettering, People forget headlines. But they remember who sat with them in silence. Chloe looked at it for a long moment. That one, she whispered. That one carried me through the night before I testified to the board. Daniel glanced at her. You remembered it. I lived it, she said. He gestured to the couch. Coffee? Actually, she said, holding up the frame, I brought something. For you and for Ellie. Daniel carefully unwrapped the paper. Inside was Ellie's old sun drawing, now professionally framed. But underneath the original quote, Chloe had added a new one in elegant script. Even cloudy skies can't erase the light within you. Ellie Shaw. Age 7. Daniel touched the glass with reverence. You remembered hers, too. More than that, Chloe said softly. I let it lead me. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folder. I bought the old Williamsburg Library building. It's falling apart, but the bones are good. I want to turn it into a center. Not for profit, not for prestige, just for people." Daniel looked up. "What kind of center?" She handed him the blueprint. "The Institute for Applied Philosophy. A place to teach value, not valuation. To build character, not capital. I want you to run it," she said. "Write the curriculum, train mentors. Let people find meaning before they're forced to look for it." Daniel stared at her for a long moment, silence blooming in the space between them. Finally he said, "Why me?" Chloe's eyes didn't waver. "Because you saved me. Before you even knew my name." She took a slow breath. "You once asked if just one person reading your words could be enough." "Daniel, I was that one person." He looked away, jaw tight with emotion. She continued, "You don't need to change the world. You already changed mine. And I'm not the only one." From the window, Ellie called out, "Daddy, come look." The bubble followed me. Daniel smiled, eyes still damp. "You always said your job was just to leave something behind." Chloe added, voice softer now, "Well, I'd like to build a place where more people can find what you left." He turned to her, voice low but steady. "You're not just building a place, Chloe. You're building a belief." They sat for a moment watching sunlight filter through the curtains, the kind of silence that says everything. Weeks later, the grand opening of the Institute drew a modest but powerful crowd, parents, teachers, teenagers who had dropped out but were looking to start again. Daniel gave no speech. Instead, he wrote a quote on the front whiteboard, "You're not your mistakes. You're what you choose to believe after them." Chloe stood at the back, her eyes misty, a rare softness in her posture. Next to her, Ellie tugged at her hand. "Do you think lots of people will come?" Chloe knelt down. "I think the right people already have." Ellie smiled. "I'm going to draw a bigger sun for the hallway." Chloe laughed. "Make it big enough to shine even when the lights go out." Ellie beamed. "Daddy says I already do." Later that evening, as the center emptied out and dusk painted the windows gold, Daniel stood alone in the main classroom. He erased the whiteboard, then paused. With the blue marker in hand, he wrote slowly, deliberately, just above where Ellie had taped her new drawing, "You don't need to speak loudly to be heard deeply." Behind him, Chloe watched from the doorway, a soft smile playing on her lips. "You're still writing quotes on boards." He turned that familiar glint in his eyes. "It's a habit I can't seem to shake." She walked toward him, then stopped close enough to hear his breath. "You're not just a janitor," she said, "and you're not just a billionaire." They stood there, two people from different worlds now orbiting the same truth. He looked at her, voice barely above a whisper. "We can't fix everything, Chloe, but maybe we can remind people that they were never broken beyond belief." She nodded. "And sometimes, that reminder is all it takes." As they stood side by side, the final sunlight of the day poured across the room, hitting Ellie's drawing on the wall. A sun burning bright through crayon clouds. A quote beneath it. A belief once mocked. Now. A beacon. And maybe that's the quiet truth behind today's story sometimes. The words we think no one hears, the kindness we give without asking anything back, the hope we hold when the world turns dark. Those are the very things that save someone else. Maybe even save their life. Now, it's your turn. Have you ever been impacted by a small act of kindness? Was there a moment when someone's quiet presence changed everything? If you've lived or witnessed a story like that, we'd love to hear it. Drop your story in the comments below. Or just let us know. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Whether you're watching from sunny Florida, rainy Seattle, the hills of Scotland, or the heart of Texas, your presence here means the world to us. And if this story touched something in you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Because tomorrow, we'll be right here sharing another story that just might change the way you see the world. Until then, remember, you don't have to change the world to change someone's world. Thank you for spending your time with us. We're honored you're here.